Okay, here's a video on comparing and ordering integers. Okay, and we know what integers are. Any number that's not a fraction or a decimal. And we have this symbol Z for integers. Zahlen, from the German word Zahlen, meaning number. So actually it looks something like this, has something like a line there. So that's the integer symbol. And we know integers are positive and negative whole numbers. So let's look at the chart here. Bring that over. So we know that all the numbers to the left are the negative numbers. We can use that symbol. And all the numbers over here to the right of 0, the positive numbers. And we know that as the numbers go to the right, they get bigger. So it's important to know that negative 1 is greater than negative 10. Okay? And negative 2 is greater than negative 9, and so forth. Right? So these numbers, they go all the way up to negative infinity. There's a symbol for negative infinity. And of course, on the other side, it goes to positive infinity. All those numbers. But we're only dealing with integers in this video. And we know since 5th grade that there's numbers in between these numbers. There's decimals. And decimals are fractions, right? So let's look at a vocabulary term. The first one we'll talk about is the inverse. And the inverse means the opposite. And the additive inverse is the opposite number. So if we had a number 5, the opposite of 5 is negative 5. And so what's the opposite of negative 6? 6. So 5 and negative 5 are additive inverses of each other. So we can use the opposite, the inverse, the additive inverse. So if I gave you this question on a test, I said, what is the additive inverse of 12? What would you say? Negative 12. Okay? Now, when we take a number, let's say we take 12, and we add its additive inverse, its opposite, we always get 0. They cancel each other out. That's important to know. So let's do it again. So if you take a number, take any number, which number? Okay, 5. What's its additive inverse? Negative 5, right? What's its opposite? You add them together, you'll get 0. Important to know. Okay, so let's look at this. The opposite of negative 14 is, what's that question mark doing over there? It's all alone over here. It should be over here, right? So the opposite of negative 14 is 14. The inverse of negative 14 is 14, same thing. And remember, if we took the additive inverse, if we added a number and its additive inverse, we'd get 0. They cancel each other out. Now this could appear on a state test. It's a tricky question. We actually did some in 6th grade. So if I say the opposite of negative 5. Now if I just said, what is the opposite of negative 5? You would say 5. But the opposite of negative 5 is negative 5. It's the same number. So you have to think about that for a minute. Remember, you're saying, what is the opposite of the opposite? All right, so the opposite of the opposite. Here's the words. Just have to think about it, right? So we know that the opposite, if we got rid of this, the opposite of negative 5 is 5. And the opposite of 5 is negative 5. So if you ever see that, you're going to see this. This appeared on some state test questions. So we'll circle that. Keep that in mind. The opposite of the opposite. So let's see if you remember. What happens when you add opposites? You get what? You get 0. Right? Not O, but 0. And what else is it called? The additive inverse. So if I said negative 16, I would have to add it to its opposite, or its inverse, or its additive inverse, and we'll get 0. Okay, and when we do integers and other numbers, we always have to compare them using these symbols: greater than, less than, equal to. We know there's a sign that says not equal, and there's also less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to, and we'll see those signs later on. So, if we look at these numbers here, what sign should I put? Is negative 7 greater than negative 9? Yes, it's greater, right? And we all know that the arrow always points to the lesser number. And what about this? Negative 1 or 0? Which one's greater? Well, 0. 0 is greater than negative 1. So remember, look at the chart. Let's go back to the chart we had in the beginning. You can find it way down here. If you see this right here, we have, as the numbers go to the right, they get bigger. So here's negative 1, but there's 0, so we know 0 is bigger. Okay. Now ordering, that's another thing we'll do. We order numbers, right? We go on the phone and we order a large 5 for dinner. Now, so when we order numbers, we want to know which ones are greater, which ones are least greatest, right? So, and be careful when the phone rings. Okay, someone's ordering numbers already on the phone, right? So, be careful when you see a question like this, because sometimes it could say order from least to greatest, or it can say greatest to least. So the vice versa means the other way around. So be careful on what the question says. So if I'm saying on a quiz, let's say we're doing something like the moons of some planets. And we'll just use a few planets here, like Mars. Mars has 2 moons. Jupiter has 67. A lot of moons. And Saturn has 62. So over here, we're not using any negative numbers, so we can see that Jupiter has the greatest amount of moons. But if I said order this from least to greatest, you would have to start with 2, right? From least to greatest. But if I said greatest to least, right? So that's pretty easy, right? So just be careful that you're not tricked. Always look at the question. So let's look at one with negatives. We'll order the numbers. We'll use the maximum surface temperature on some planets and some planets. So I'll pick a few here. And remember, this is the maximum temperature. This is the hottest they can go, and sometimes they can be hotter. So you can see Mercury, 840 degrees, very hot. You don't want to go there. And Mercury also, the other side of Mercury is very cold. It's colder than Earth. And Neptune, negative 353 degrees. Very cold, extremely cold at Neptune. Mars can get up to 70 degrees, but that's at the equator in the summer. Most of Mars is cold. So Mars can get into negative 200s. So Mars is cold, but if you're at the equator in the summer, you happen to have oxygen, well, that's warm, right? And Saturn, negative 285, very cold. Jupiter, negative 190. And Venus, the hottest planet, even though it's not the closest planet to the Sun, it's the hottest planet because of its cloud cover. So if we had to order these, how would you order these? From greatest to least. From greatest to least, how would you order them? Okay, well, the hottest one we have is Venus, so we would say 870. Greatest to least, now, we can cross that out. Then Mercury, 840. Right, then there's a big drop. So what's the next greatest number? Mars at 70. Big drop. And the next? Jupiter at negative 190. And always double check. And then we have Saturn at negative 285. And the last one is Neptune at negative 353. Right, so remember, negative 190 is a greater number than negative 353 and negative 285. So in the negative world, what appears to be a lower number is actually a greater number, a higher number. Okay, and if you look at these temperatures on Earth, Earth never gets anywhere near 200 degrees below zero. The record temperature on Earth was like a negative 128 below zero. Okay, so that's ordering numbers. We ordered them, we compared them, and we did integers. Great job.